This is the criminal known as the Chameleon. One woman, many different faces.
She's very bright, she's very skilled, cunning, furtive, and highly dangerous.
She's a consummate con artist and a master of disguise. She preys on vulnerable women. She's stolen the identities of at least 6 women and used the aliases of dozens more. She travels the world with her fake IDs. She's the prime suspect for one of America's most brutal killings.
For a person to commit this type of murder, you have to believe that they do not have a conscience.
It was gruesome and beyond belief.
Her name is Elaine Parent. She's been dubbed the world's most wanted woman. This is her story. In July 1990, the headless body of a young woman was found by the side of a canal in St. Lucie County, Florida.
2001 Chevy.
It was one of the most gruesome murders police in Florida had ever seen.
The call came in through 911, and the fisherman had found what he believed was a body on a canal bank.
1825.
The head had been cut off. The hands have been cut off. There had also been an injury to the abdomen that, upon further investigation, a tattoo had been cut out of the stomach. This body was gone beyond the killing. It was an overkill, and I've been a deputy sheriff for 21 years in St. Lucie County, and that's the first time I'd seen a body mutilated in that condition.
The mutilated body was identified as Beverly McGowan, a 34-year-old bank clerk from Pompano Beach. No one has ever been arrested for her murder. But for the last 12 years, the police have been trying to find Elaine Parent, the woman they believe holds the key to solving this killing. Parent trawls bars, homeless shelters and graveyards looking for new identities. Because of her ability to assume alternate personalities, she's been nicknamed the Chameleon.
Elaine Parent, there is no Elaine Parent. She is an empty vessel. We talk about her personality, which may not be a personality at all. I think she has a compulsion to fill up this psychic emptiness by almost vampirically taking over the life, the traits, the personal history of another human being.
This is Nora Pfeiffer at the State Attorney's Office. Can I help you?
State
Yes.
Attorney Investigator Nora Pfeiffer has been with this case over a period of almost 12 years. She is the one that has pursued it all this time, and she is there to follow it up. She has not let go of this case.
You take care. Bye-bye. I keep these photos up here because this definitely shows the chameleon effect of her. It seems kind of ironic that it's such a complicated case, but the individual in these pictures, she holds the key as to what happened to Beverly. This is one of the most difficult homicide cases because all our leads have been days, months, even years behind. Most homicides, you like to get solved in the first 24, 48 hours. Much more time after that, and it becomes difficult to solve them. That gets a little frustrating. Steve McGowan is the one family member whom I've remained in contact with. I feel his pain every time I talk to him. I feel his frustration. I can tell that his sister is in his mind every day.
It's been 11 years of wondering why.
I mean, you do see stories in the newspaper and you read them thinking, boy, what a tragedy, but that would never happen to me. It could never happen in my life. And then it does. And boy, does it wake you up.
In 1990, Beverly McGowan was living 100 miles south of St. Lucie County in the holiday town of Pompano Beach. Like many of the women who fell prey to Elaine Parent, 34-year-old Beverly was a single woman living alone. She shared a small apartment with her 2 cats.
The best way I remember her, she was a good person. Cared very much about her friends and her family. Very loyal. She would accept somebody right away instead of laying back and checking a little bit, because she believed everything that people told her. In the last couple of years, she had seemed to get her life on track with where she wanted to go. She had finally gotten a job she was satisfied with, working at the bank. She had purchased a condo with nobody else's assistance. And she seemed very contented the last few times I saw her.
In July of 1990, Beverly McGowan placed an ad in the Sun-Sentinel paper in Fort Lauderdale for a roommate. Within a few days, she had met this individual whom she called Alice. Alice was from England, worked for IBM, and was on a temporary duty assignment over here. Beverly talked about how excited she was that Alice was going to live with her.
She assured me this person was a trustworthy person and this was going to be the perfect situation for Bev in the long run.
When she came to look at the apartment, Alice introduced Beverly to numerology, the science of predicting the future through numbers. It was a trick. Beverly handed over intimate details of her life.
Within a few days, Alice is able to gain Beverly's confidence through the use of numerology. Alice gets her date of birth, her social security number, every personal number, and pretty much inhabits most of Beverly's life.
Armed with Beverly's social security and bank details, Alice had enough information to assume her identity. She could now become Beverly McGowan.
When she met with Beverly, she played on some type of vulnerability, but that's actually one of the great characteristics of a con artist, is being able to recognize what your vulnerability is and be able to play on it and win your confidence.
She's a consummate con artist, and she knows her mark. If you are someone who's missing love, who's lonely, you might be taken in by the magical thinking, the power that suggests that this woman has special knowledge.
Beverly McGowan was trusting and emotionally vulnerable. From an early age, she'd had difficulty with relationships.
When she was younger, she had 2 boyfriends who both passed away in automobile accidents. In her early 20s, she had 2 or 3 serious boyfriends, but she always seemed to break them off when they became too close. In her later years, I had heard that there's a possibility that she had looked at being bisexual. Maybe one thing she was really looking for love, too.
Within days of their first meeting, Alice prepared a numerology chart for Beverly and made a series of seductive predictions.
The numerology was what was convincing Bev to travel, that she's going to meet a new person in her life, that this was the best thing for her right now. I mean, Alice took Bev away from her friends and kind of got her into her own little web there. A friend of mine came into town on Sunday, and I had called her to come up to see him also. And she told me she was busy with this person, Alice. It was a very ordinary conversation. There was nothing to lead me to believe that there was anything wrong. And there was, in fact, it was just the opposite. It seemed to be that, this was going to be the person that was going to be able to help her for a while.
On July 17th, Beverly McGowan goes to work, and she's still excited about Alice and the prospect of having a new roommate. And that was her last day at work.
On Tuesday evening, Beverly made a routine phone call to a friend. It was the last time anyone heard from the real Beverly McGowan.
On July 18th, an individual calling herself Beverly McGowan calls in sick to work, and unfortunately, nobody ever sees Beverly McGowan again.
But someone calling herself Beverly McGowan would soon lead detectives on an international manhunt. July 1990, a week after advertising for a flatmate, Beverly McGowan had gone missing. On the night of Tuesday, July the 17th, she made her last known phone call to a friend. 2 days later, her brother received an alarming letter.
I just want to say goodbye to you and the kids and let you know that what I'm doing is the right thing. This is what I need at this point in my life, so don't worry. When I come back, I'll be a much better and happier person. Goodbye, Bev.
So I saw the letter, but I was very disturbed by it. For her to leave didn't make any sense because she was giving up everything that she'd worked so hard for. And then once I was reading the letter and I get down the bottom and I see that goodbye, I said she was trying to tell me something at that point. I can show you 100 letters from her to different people. There's not one of them say any more than Bev. I think that there was somebody there with her when she was writing my letter.
I believe Beverly wrote the letters because Alice had convinced her to go with her wherever and that she would give her a better life or she would show her how to have a better life.
Of course, I called Bev and I couldn't get a hold of her. I kept trying. She wasn't at work. She wasn't at home. So we called the sheriff's department. And unfortunately, when you're an adult and you leave a letter saying you're going to travel, you're not considered a missing person. So basically what we did was we broke into her apartment. And the dishes in the sink, her dress was laying on the floor. The cats were gone, and the answering machine was gone. And I noticed that her gun was missing. Part of the thing I'm thinking, geez, maybe she really did this. Maybe she really just packed her stuff up and left. That would explain why her cats are gone, because she wouldn't go anywhere without them.
Steve then made a phone call he has regretted for 12 years.
I called up and canceled her credit cards, thinking this was the right thing to do. If she doesn't have them, she can't travel, and at least that'll make her mad enough to call me.
St. Lucie County, 100 miles up the coast. The same day Steve received Beverly's letter, a fisherman stumbled across what he thought was a bag of rags by the side of a canal. When he examined it, he discovered the mutilated body of a woman.
This is where the body was found. The body was located right in here. Had the body got into the water, There are alligators that's large enough that could have taken the body.
2954 on A9.
The hands had been amputated and it had been decapitated. And the normal identifiers that you would use most commonly to identify another person wasn't present. The face, the hands for fingerprints.
To hide the victim's identity, the killer had crudely hacked a highly distinctive tattoo out from her stomach. But there was a second tattoo, and the killer missed it.
The way that she was originally identified by name was because of the presence of a yellow rose tattoo on her right ankle. The local television companies broadcast her description with this yellow rose tattoo mentioned.
About 10 o'clock at night, the phone rings, and it's a friend of Beth's. And she just explained to me that she said they found a body in the Lucie County canal, and it has a yellow tattoo of a rose on its ankle. And my first reaction was of course that was Bev. I didn't even enter my thought that it wasn't. It was just like, your worst nightmare. It was just your worst nightmare. It was just, how do you deal with this now? Sorry. Next day, we did make that drive up to St. Lucie County. Then I didn't look at the body. I didn't have enough courage to go do that. I didn't want to see, it's my sister, I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to see that.
The mutilation to Beverly's body was so severe that it was impossible to establish the cause of death.
There was no asphyxiation. There was no gunshot wound. I can't rule out that she may have been bludgeoned on the decapitated head part. I can't rule out that she might have been shot in the head and then mutilated. However, there's a very, very good possibility that the way she was killed was by cutting her throat initially. It had to be a very cold-blooded individual to do this kind of thing.
For the person who committed this crime, it's impossible to say if they have killed before, but because of the brutality to Miss McGowan's body, you would think that this person would not hesitate to kill again, that the chopping off of one's head or one's hands did not bother them in the least.
Detectives were baffled. They could find no clear motive for Beverly's murder, and her life held few clues.
There's nothing special about Beverly. There are some victims that, because of their lifestyle, they take a chance and they are a high risk of becoming a victim of a homicide. Beverly didn't fit any of those kind of parameters. Her lifestyle was not remarkable. She wasn't rich. She wasn't great looking. She wasn't a beauty queen. There was not anything to say that Beverly McGowan would end up being discarded on a canal bank as being an unidentifiable body.
One of the first questions you ask yourself as a detective on a homicide case is, who benefits from this murder? Most of the time, there's a financial benefit. In this particular case, nobody really benefited financially from Beverly's death.
One person might have vital information: the mysterious Alice. She had told Beverly she worked for IBM, but when detectives checked, there was no record of any such person, and Alice herself had disappeared. Then a major break. Someone started using Beverly McGowan's credit cards throughout the Miami Beach area. The person did not fit the description of Beverly McGowan, and at the time the cards were used, Beverly was already dead.
We have a description of a white female with blonde hair, very attractive and large breasts. So this is somebody else who has obtained her credit cards, and they are utilizing these credit cards.
That same day, phone records showed someone had called Avis Car Hire at Heathrow Airport from Beverly's apartment. Then, 2 days later, her cards were used again. This time, the person using them looked very different.
July 20th, Beverly McGowan's credit card was used as a travel agency. The person said they already had a reservation to fly to London on July 22nd. The individual using that credit card was described as a man dressed as a woman wearing a cheap Cleopatra-type wig. I'm still not sure if it was two people utilizing Beverly's credit cards or one person who could cleverly conceal their identity.
Was more than one person involved in Beverly's murder, or was the killer an expert at disguise?
There was nothing normal about this investigation from the get-go. When this all started happening, the identification, the credit cards, and everything started happening pretty fast, and it seemed like we were just a step or two behind the killers.
3 days after Beverly's body was found, the person using her credit cards flew to London. A hire car had been reserved under Beverly McGowan's name at Heathrow Airport. The killer was now using Beverly's identity to flee the States and hide in London.
Now, law enforcement has to deal with not only leaving the jurisdiction of the state of Florida, but leaving the jurisdiction of the United States, and we have to go through certain protocol and request assistance from the London Metropolitan Police.
The search for Beverly's killer was now an international manhunt. Three days after the body of Beverly McGowan was discovered, a woman using her credit cards arrived at Heathrow.
An individual appears at the Avis rental counter at the London Heathrow Airport wearing a cheap Cleopatra-type wig. I believe that Alice boarded the plane under an assumed name and identity, landed in the UK, then she went into a bathroom, and I believe that Alice changed her identity and then approached the Avis car rental desk.
The car had been booked using Beverly's card and driver's license. When Alice arrived at the rental desk, she now looked like Beverly McGowan.
This is an example of fake it till you make it. She's faking, she's putting on a performance, but I think in the action of doing this, something takes over and she, in fact, leaps into the role of this person, and it's not faking anymore. It's not contrived anymore. It's the reality in which she's living.
But at the rental desk, Alice hit an unexpected problem. She wasn't able to use Beverly's credit cards because Steve McGowan had already cancelled them.
When the sales representative at the Avis car rental in London said this card had been canceled and seized the card, the person said, I must have overextended my limit, and was able to pay cash.
Now Alice knew that someone was on her trail. But she was one crucial step ahead of her pursuers. Florida detectives didn't discover Beverly's credit card fraud until 48 hours after the car was rented. And because she could no longer use the credit cards, the police would have no paper trail to follow. Steve McGowan blames himself.
At the time I canceled her credit card, I thought I did something really great. But it turned out to be maybe one of the worst things we ever did. I was just, at the time, I just wanted Bev to call me. I just wanted her to call me and say, what's wrong with you? Why did you cancel my credit cards?
We received a call from the Sheriff's Department at St. Lucie County informing us that a car had been hired at Heathrow Airport using a credit card belonging to a murder victim. This person, if not the murderer, was in some way involved with the murder of Beverly McGowan, and arrangements were made that should any contact be made by the hirer, that they would be directed to the nearest Avis office.
Later that week, Alice called to extend the car hire. She was directed to a nearby Avis office. Cornish waited to pounce, but Alice never showed.
We then moved on to the date that the car was due to be returned here to Heathrow, and we had a squad of officers at Avis waiting for it to be returned. About mid-morning we were informed by Avis that the car had been recovered, having broken down, and that the car was empty, no occupants.
My gut feeling tells me that the person driving the car was probably standing in the shadows or in the crowd watching the activity around this car, knowing that there was more activity than necessary for a car that's just late to be returned on a rental. And that was the last leads that we have to follow up on.
The vehicle was examined and checked for fingerprints. The fact that there were no fingerprints found other than the Avis staff led us to believe that we were dealing with somebody who knew what they were up to, someone who knew how to hide their trail.
Alice abandoned the car a few miles from Heathrow. Cornish assumed she was fleeing the country and switched his officers back to the airport.
We boarded every aircraft that was due to depart for the United States and physically looked at every passenger on board. We suspected that on arrival this person was wearing a long black wig. That didn't necessarily mean that she would still have the wig on when she left. Our inspection of the aircraft drew a blank.
You always look for that break that nails the case down, and in this particular case, the nails have been there, we just hadn't been there to hit the nail when they were there.
Dave Brooks, he was a great guy, a very hard-working man. There was a night where he was in my house, and he was just in tears. I mean, he was in tears apologizing because he hadn't done more. And he didn't know, basically he just wanted to solve it.
This type of case, it's usually a once-in-a-lifetime type of case for any detective or agent. It's the type of case that keeps you going. Any free moment you get, you pick it up and you try to develop a new lead.
2 years after Beverly McGowan's murder, the investigation was scaled down. The case was forgotten, except by state investigator Nora Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer had become obsessed by the story. Although she was assigned to other cases, the hunt for Beverly's killer continued to haunt her.
Nora Pfeiffer is a type of investigator you would not want pursuing you. She is a workaholic. She does not let go of things. Once she has a lead, she will dig and dig and dig.
Nora Pfeiffer had one lead she kept coming back to, the passenger list for the flight she believed Alice took after Beverly's murder, flight BA 292 from Miami to London.
We began identifying everybody on that flight. We ran into a jurisdiction problem when we were dealing with non-Florida residents.
With an international manhunt on her hands, Pfeiffer turned to the State Department in Washington for help. Every untraceable woman's name on the flight manifest was sent to the State Department to be run through their computers. One name came back that set alarm bells ringing. Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, a British national with a string of aliases.
Based on the investigation that's been conducted, we now believe that Alice traveled as a British citizen named Sylvia Hodgkinson from Miami, Florida to London. Then we begin delving into the life of Sylvia Hodgkinson. We learn other aliases such as Elaine Parent and Charlotte Cohen, and that's when we get the break in our investigation.
Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson was from Lewisham, South London. When her husband died, she had ended up in a refuge for homeless women. Poor, ill-educated and alone in the world, Hodgkinson was natural prey for Beverly McGowan's killer. But Pfeiffer could find no trace of Sylvia Hodgkinson. Had the killer claimed another victim in London? It would be another decade before Pfeiffer learned that the killer had stolen Hodgkinson's identity, but let her live.
Elaine Parent is a world-class con artist. I think it's highly possible that she met up with Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson and became very aware that this was a simple woman who didn't have a passport, that is essential for her to assume this person's identity.
With no sign of the real Sylvia Hodgkinson, Nora Pfeiffer returned to the intelligence data on the passenger list from BA Flight 292. The State Department had given Pfeiffer 2 additional aliases to follow up on, Elaine Parent and Charlotte Ray Cohen. It took many months, but Pfeiffer eventually discovered that a Charlotte Ray Cohen had been arrested for car theft 5 years earlier in May 1991 in North Miami, just 20 miles from where Beverly McGowan had lived.
An officer for the North Miami Beach Police Department stopped the vehicle that Alice, or Sylvia Hodgkinson as we're now calling her, was driving. She had identification papers for 3 different individuals, Sylvia Hodgkinson, Elaine Parent, and Charlotte Cohen. She was traveling with 2 dogs, several wigs, and a diary.
The woman was locked up and held overnight. The prime suspect for Beverly McGowan's murder was in police custody, but no one knew it. The next morning, she was released on bail and disappeared. Back in 1991, no one had had enough information to make the connection between Alice, Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, and Charlotte Cohen. Once again, the mysterious middle-aged woman sought on both sides of the Atlantic had slipped through the net.
When we learned that she was actually in custody in May of 1991, we just said, once again, she's slipped through our clutches. She's very clever and apparently has luck on her side.
Several months later, Pfeiffer finally tracked down the real Charlotte Ray Cohen to a small town in central Florida. When she was shown a photo of the woman using her name, Cohen immediately remembered her. She met the woman 10 years earlier in a gay bar in Orlando. The woman was then using yet another identity, Anne Tremont. Today, Cohen is too terrified to show her face.
Well, I was sitting in the bar, and she walked in and sat next to me. We just started chatting. She said her name was Anne Tremont. Very nice looking, well-dressed, well-mannered, striking eyes. She looked totally out of place for the place she was in. I thought it was bizarre because she was talking to me. That was kind of weird for me. And she wanted to know if she could buy me a drink, and I said yes, and then she started the numerology. Said she was into the charts, and she asked me different dates. She was asking me about Social Security number, driver's license numbers, She was going to work up a chart for me. And then she saw a guy come in, and then she said that was her brother and that she had to go. But she wanted my phone number because she wanted to call me. So I thought nothing. I went on home. And then the next day she called me. She came over after I got off work, and we went by my mother's briefly. And then, see, I didn't hear from her for a couple of months.
Then the woman calling herself Anne Tremont suddenly arrived at Cohen's door in the middle of the night.
She just showed up on my doorstep, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning one night. The wig, the mustache, totally hysterical, dressed like a guy with the shirt, the tie, opened up, saying she had to get out of town. She had escaped from the hospital. They were after her. And she wanted me to let her use my birth certificate to get a fake ID. Meantime, she's getting hysterical. She's crying. And the longer I keep not saying yes, the worse it gets. This woman is an excellent actress. So I let her use it. It's probably 3 or 4 weeks. And I started getting really worried about it. And then I got a letter in the mail with it in it. She'd sent it back and thanked me, and that was the last I ever heard of her.
Police concluded that Charlotte Ray Cohen had had a lucky escape. She'd lost her identity, but not her life. Now, Nora Pfeiffer had only one name left to check, Elaine Parent. But Parent turned out to have a history and a criminal record.
Elaine Parent had actually been a registered real estate agent in the state of Florida. She had lived there back in the 1980s, and in fact, she'd been arrested in 1976 in Fort Lauderdale for shoplifting. We were able to obtain fingerprints on her at that time.
Elaine Parent's prints matched those of the woman arrested with false identities in Miami in 1991. Finally, more than 6 years after Beverly McGowan's murder, Nora Pfeiffer had the real name of the woman she was hunting. The chameleon-like woman who called herself by turns Anne Tremont, Charlotte Ray Cohen, Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, and Alice was Elaine Antoinette Parent. But if Pfeiffer now knew who she was looking for, she had no idea of the identity she was currently using, or even which country she was living in. Six years after the murder of Beverly McGowan, Nora Pfeiffer finally had the real name of her prime suspect, Elaine Antoinette Parent, an American citizen with a record of petty crime. But where in the world was she? Searching for clues, police carried out electrostatic document analysis, or ESTA testing, on the letters Beverly McGowan had written to her family. The tests on the notepaper revealed hidden messages, and they were not in Beverly's handwriting.
With the ESTA test, basically what this does is they're able to test the letters and bring up any imprinted or embedded writing upon that letter. It would be as though I would write here, tear this off, and like when you were a small child, you would take your pencil and do this, and then your embedded writing would appear on this paper. The documents examiner was able to tell us that the imprinted letters was not the same handwriting as Beverly McGowan's. The letters were of such a tone that you felt that the author was very hostile and very angry and possibly was striking out at a loved one.
Patient detective work revealed the letters were written by Elaine Parent to a woman in London, a friend or lover from her past. Once again, the trail led back to England.
You will feel the repercussions, I guarantee it. After your treatment and abandonment of me, I have no remorse in tearing down what in truth I created anyways. Give me back my life.
The sample of the imprinted writing suggested that there was an extreme disturbance in her thinking. She was hypersensitive. She was over-dramatic. The handwriting was very, very illegible. The syntax in the writing was extremely disorganized. All of this very consistent with an enormously rage-filled and highly manic psychiatric state.
Handwriting samples proved the letters were from Elaine Parent, and the letters led them to a British business executive, a woman who shared her smart South London home with Parent in the years between 1985 and 1990. Police are now protecting this woman and identify her only as Miss X.
When Elaine Parent was in Miami in the 1980s, she met another woman who we refer to as Miss X. Miss X was actually from England, and at times Elaine Parent would return back to England to see Miss X.
Miss X is still too frightened to talk publicly about Parent, but Detective John Cornish interviewed her on Pfeiffer's behalf.
I visited the lady and I found her to be a very attractive, very well turned out business lady working for one of the blue chip international companies.
Miss X confirmed to Cornish that she knew Elaine Parent well, and that in July 1990 Parent had flown to England and hired the Avis rental car immediately after Beverly McGowan's murder. Once again, Parent moved in.
It was apparent that she'd had a relationship with this Elaine Parent. She was bisexual, but that the relationship had soured and she'd been threatened by Parent both physically and with having her sexuality exposed to her employers. She also did discuss with me how Elaine Parent's moods would swing from being quite normal and easy to get on with to being completely impossible to live with and violent. And she was in fear, deep fear, of what Parent would do to her if she came forward and gave evidence. After the relationship had ended and Parent had left the United Kingdom, Miss X thought the relationship was over and finished. And then shortly after the death of Beverly, Parent arrived unannounced back in the UK at Miss X's home.
3 months after Beverly McGowan's murder, Elaine Parent left London and Miss X for good and returned to the US. When they split up, Parent sent Miss X a note with letters cut out from a newspaper threatening to kill her. For 2 years, Nora Pfeiffer lost track of Parent. She had no idea which identity her quarry was using or where she was hiding out.
It's very hard to catch her because other than assuming other people's identities, this woman becomes a person and assumes their personality. So each juncture represents a different style, a different way of doing things. Other than seducing her victims, there's nothing consistent for her. So it's very hard to track someone who, in fact, becomes a different perpetrator every time she commits a crime.
Then in 1998, the TV program America's Most Wanted showed a photo of Elaine Parent. A woman from St. Petersburg, Florida, recognized the picture and called in, but she knew the woman by yet another name, Sandra Little.
This is Sandra, as I knew her. It's not a good picture of her, but it is her. I knew her with very blonde hair, but dressing the same way.
Patricia Nevins actually lived with Elaine Parent under her identity of Sandra in 1992. Parent was destitute and living in a homeless shelter when Nevins gave her a home. They lived as landlady and lodger, but Nevins had no idea of Parent's past. While others have been too scared to come forward, Nevins has agreed to speak out about the year she spent with Parent.
This was the living room, and it was the television actually was in the same spot, and Sandra often sat here after she called it the parlor, and she sat here and she watched basically the news, the world news, and on Wednesday evening she enjoyed watching America's Most Wanted. This was the room that Sandra had. It was personally for her. And she stayed here for about a year and 4 or 5 months. I did have a dear friend of mine who was a psychiatrist come to dinner one night to see what was her problem, how can we help her. And he said that she was a budding sociopath and very intelligent, and that the same way she arrived, she would disappear.
On one occasion, Patricia Nevins invited her attorney to a dinner party, and Parent's behavior was disturbing.
My attorney had a very expensive ID type of bracelet on, about an inch thick, very heavy gold, and she had walked past and made a gesture that she was going to saw off his hand and take the jewelry. There was one time when I thought that she was possibly going to have a breakdown. She was at her wit's end, and she said that if she could start all over, the only way she could actually really have a life would be to have a different identity.
Elaine Parent left Patricia's life as quickly as she came into it. In 1992, she traveled to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, to share an apartment with a new woman friend.
Elaine Parent takes a job under her new identity at Sears and works there till some point in 1993. Later, around Easter of 1994, one woman who remembered working with her said that she saw her on the road just south of Nashville, Tennessee, and that's the last we've seen of Elaine Parent.
It may be the last sighting, but it's not the last Nora Pfeiffer heard from the Chameleon. In 1998, an anonymous letter arrived at the Sheriff's Department.
Inside the envelope was a postcard which appeared to be an oil-type painting. It appeared to be an age-enhanced photograph of Elaine Parent. On the back of the painting it had, "Your Chameleon, best wishes," and it was signed with an indecipherable signature. This letter was sent bearing a stamp that had originated in the United Kingdom. At the time we received this postcard, I felt like Elaine Parent had sent it, just to let us know she was alive and doing well.
She now knows that she can do anything and get away with it. It's going to be a game of cat and mouse.
Was Elaine Parent back in the UK, taunting detectives from the safety of London? Then last year, a new sighting by an old friend. Patricia Nevins spotted Parent in a Sam's Club supermarket in Clearwater, Florida.
I was shopping for Easter dinner, and I looked up and a woman caught my eye, and I thought it was Sandra, but she was much heavier, and her hair was longer and a little bit more brunette. My heart was racing because I really thought it was her, and as I walked towards her, I just lowered my head for a moment, and she was gone.
This particular store is one that, to be a member, you do have a photo ID card, but we will attempt to research the databases of the store to see if we can find a photograph that represents Elaine Parent.
But as the net closed in on her, Elaine Parent's fragile mental state began to shatter.
She must, like some type of a vampire in a sense, draw her sustenance from the identities and the natures of other people, such that if she were prevented from being involved in this type of relationship, I suspect that she would become extraordinarily either withdrawn and depressed, possibly to the point of suiciding. This woman is a loaded gun waiting to go off.
March 2002. Responding to a tip-off, police tracked down Elaine Parent to an apartment in Panama City, Florida. Officers waited outside her bedroom as the person dubbed the world's most wanted woman got dressed. When they knocked on the door, she shot herself in the chest with a revolver. Elaine Antoinette Parent died at the scene, taking to her grave the secrets of her extraordinary criminal career.
There's no closure to this. There's no ending to Bev's death. There are times where I'll be riding down the street in the car and hear a song on the radio and I'll start to cry.
By committing suicide before police could question her, the mystery of Elaine Parent lives on.
There are times when Sergeant Brooks and I sit down and talk about this case and wonder, was Beverly killed just for her identity?
Who really was she?
That is an enigma. Certainly Elaine Parent doesn't know who the real Elaine Parent is.
And what happened to all the other women she met and exploited during her life?
We in law enforcement believe that Elaine Parent has approximately 20 different identities. We believe Elaine Parent has traveled, of course, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, Saint-Tropez, Istanbul, South Africa, Israel, and France. I think it's always going to be like an open wound.
Elaine Parent, the chameleon killer, took all these secrets with her to her grave.